Iamar prestar sen, hanmathanonen, hanmathanachai, ahanoston nedwilith. That's some form of Elvish. In the common tongue, it reads, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring film released 20 years ago this month. Don't you feel old? Older even than one of the Dunedain Rangers. This film truly changed our world forever. Now we shall host a good Narnian prince, Rilian himself, returning from last Christmas. This time we will explore how Christians loved exploring Peter Jackson's one film trilogy to rule them all from 2001 until today. Welcome back to Fantastical Truth, a podcast from Lorehaven in which we explore the best Christian-made fantasy, science fiction, and beyond, and we apply the meanings of these stories to the real world that our author Jesus has called us to serve. I'm E. Stephen Burnett. I publish Lorehaven. I'm also the co-author of a nonfiction book about fiction called The Pop Culture Parent.
And I'm Zachary Russell, and 20 years ago when Lord of the Rings came out, I was in my 20s, and now that I'm in midlife, you can call me Zach the Gray. And this is episode 92. 20 years later, how did we enjoy The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring? And we'll be joined today by Rilian from Narnia Web.
Everybody debates whether a certain action hero movie is a Christmas movie, or rather it's actually all very one-sided. I haven't found that faction out there that's arguing, no, it's not a Christmas movie and I'm going to die hard on this hill. But no one really gets into the debate about whether the Lord of the Rings films are Christmas movies. And to me, they are. Not just because Gandalf looks vaguely Santa-like, but because since 2001, 2002, 2003, the Lord of the Rings trilogy is inexorably associated with Christmas. I saw these films for the first time around Christmas. There was always, back then, there was Lord of the Rings merch that was part of the Christmas spread when I was growing up. And of course, I now watch these films when I do only around Christmas time, not just because they're really long.
Isn't that funny? Yeah,
it is.
Well, true.
Not just because they're really long, and it usually you need some time off to get through them, even if you split them up over several nights. But just because the meaning of them for me is associated with Christmas. And every year before we start the Christmas music season, I listen to the entire complete recordings of the Lord of the Rings soundtrack by Howard Shore.
You know, that is something I was discussing with some other people recently, that even the music for this trilogy is so memorable and it's so well done. It's such a faithful adaptation of the feel of the books, and not to mention how closely the movies mirror the books, and it's just very nostalgic. It feels like, will we ever get that again? Because everything must be co-opted nowadays for one message or another. And the Lord of the Rings is just, it really just takes you into the world of the books. It makes you love the books so much more. But, you know, it's been 30 years since I've read the books. So you're a more recent reader of the books than me, Stephen. So you can probably speak more to how well they follow. But, and I know there's some big complaints that the hardcore fans like your wife have with the adaptation. But overall, I just think it's so fun to watch this movie. It's so refreshing.
It is. And yes, you allude to some of the fan complaints. Rilian and I get into those in our conversation for sure. I don't mind those so much because, as you said, things could definitely be worse. I was talking with another fan of the films in my family. Yeah, I can't imagine what you'd be referring to there. That's one of our episodes that maybe we'll get to next year. Speaking of our schedule for next year, I wanted to update y'all in the listening audience about how we're going to handle Fantastical Truth over the holidays. This, I believe, episode 92 is our next to last episode for the year. We will have one more coming out, and we'll cue that up at the end of this show. And that one will be another episode with James Hannibal and Marion Jacobs and I from a recent Realmmakers live stream. That will be our last episode of the new year. And then I believe it's Tuesday, January the 4th, that Zach and I will be taking off. There will not be a new episode on that day after the New Year's Day weekend. Also, however, there will be something new called the Lorehaven Guild. We're launching this, and this is sort of a pre-announcement of that new feature for Lorehaven. We're going to launch this, I hope, in January. The January date will be announced exclusively first to subscribers of Lorehaven. So go to lorehaven.com and get that free subscription. If you want to go directly to the long form, you can go to lorehaven.com/subscribe. The Lorehaven Guild will be an online community hosting monthly book quests through Christian-made fantasy, science fiction, and beyond. old stuff like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or new stuff of books that Lorehaven has positively reviewed. And you'll just be able to meet other readers of the webzine and other listeners of the podcast and share in the growing community for these kinds of stories. It's going to be very fan focused. So not a writers community. We got plenty of those, but just a place where Christian fans of all ages can meet one another and enjoy and explore these stories together.
Yeah, you remember those old days when we used to gather around the fire and talk about books and just talk about the parts we like, or maybe our theories, or even the parts that we kind of groan at a little bit. That's very much what this is going to be, but in a more convenient factor that can allow us to be gathering with people worldwide.
And in January or just before, we will send out the sign up link for that server. You'll be able to get that by subscribing to lorehaven.com. So before Rillian enters the studio, let's get our first sponsor for this episode. Once again, Mountain Brook Fire with a new fantasy title. This one is Heaven Came Down, a book for adult readers of apocalyptic and sci-fi thrillers with a supernatural twist. This comes from author Brian Davis, known for his dragon novels. This one has a description as follows: heavenly messengers or deadly parasites. In the chaotic aftermath of apocalyptic war, the strange lights in the sky heralding the coming of unearthly beings seemed like an answer to prayer. When the heavenly visitors entered, selected people, and transformed them into angels who demanded obedience in exchange for the restoration of order, the majority accepted their new rulers. But Ben Garrison and his siblings, Jack and Trudy, have seen a dark side to these so-called angels. They join a rebel faction with one goal: destroy the invaders and free the world from their tyranny. There's more to that book description. You can find that in our show notes for this episode, or you can go to lorehaven.com/podcast sponsors. There you will also find the cover for this book and the purchase links at Amazon and elsewhere. Rillian has returned to the studio aboard the back of a flying horse, not a Middle-earth means of transport, but certainly a Narnian means of transport. That's how we met, he and I, back on the Narnia web forums back in the 2000s. Before, during, and after the release of those films, which of course followed after the success of the Middle-earth trilogy from Peter Jackson. But Rillian, along with other of our friends, such as Glumpuddle and Jim Fenn, are running the Talking Beasts podcast. Obviously, a Lewis reference there from his Narniad Septet. We used to do episodes back when, for example, the Dawn Treader movie came out, which was the subject of Rillian's and my last episode on Fantastical Truth at this time last year. Glumpuddle, we haven't had him on this podcast, but he's still on Talking Beasts, and I was amused going to get all the links and everything. They have a quote up at the Talking Beasts link from one of the Narnia screenwriters, Stephen McFeely. Really, where did this come from? Where it just says, Glumpuddle, I have issues with you.
Glumpuddle would remember completely, but I'm sure he has it like engraved in crystal on his mantelpiece or something. I think it was actually like a red carpet event. I think it was some kind of publicity event. Maybe I don't know if it was Comic-Con or a red carpet event, where it was just one of those. I think he was talking to people about some of the fan coverage, and he was talking about how much he appreciated the fans, and then he said, "Glumpuddle, I have issues with you." Uh,
I'll take it. And then now this is one of the top screenwriters in the world from the Avengers franchise.
Yeah, the fact that one of the writers knew him by his online moniker tickled him pink, I'll say. So,
well, we're keeping online monikers here. You guys buy online monikers. Explore the Narnia books and films at Talking Beasts. You're interviewing scholars and actors. I particularly enjoyed the episode y'all had a few weeks ago, which was the meeting of the Caspians. It was Samuel West, who plays Caspian in the BBC's Voyage of the Dawn Treader, as well as Ben Barnes, who played Prince and then King Caspian in the Prince Caspian and Dawn Treader movies from Walden Media. It was just great to hear them compare notes. And, you know, Ben Barnes is saying, like, I loved watching you, Samuel West, in the BBC Voyage of the Dawn Treader. And you guys, of course, in the podcast, at least as we record now, are actually wrapping a kind of a series within a series, going through the BBC miniseries about the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. Now that's amusing to listen to, because I haven't seen that in a long time.
We rewatched the Voyage of the Dawn Treader BBC series. Like, we just rewatch each episode like before each recording episode and review it the way we would review it if it were coming out now. And we actually, it's interesting enough that it doesn't even have a lot of comparison to Walden. Every once in a while we might mention something, but most of it's kind of a standalone review of the BBC
Yeah, the BBC Narnia films were in existence before the Middle Earth films, and I don't think there's a lot of similarity between those either. I was amused, by the way, y'all need to go check out this series, but I was amused that you mentioned in the podcast Talking Beast that somehow you had all along missed the sea serpent fight from the start of what is it, episode 3 of the Dawn Treader
Yes,
series. Yeah, have you
yes.
figured out how you missed that? Did someone censor it from you because it was too scary for
Apparently
Will
there were
William?
apparently there were multiple edits for
Okay.
different
Oh,
releases, because when I
interesting. Okay.
watched it, it was a VHS, like a VHS movie, and it was a two-part package. You know, they would remember those old plastic VHS?
Yeah,
Oh
they'd
my
have a
goodness,
little
I'm dating
paper
myself.
divider between the 2
Yeah, this
cassette
is this is even
cartridges.
before the days when iPods had moving parts for those who wanna make me feel really old. But, yeah, you had, like, those big plasticky, cases. Well, you had, like, the double cases for 2 VHS tapes, because if you went over, like, 98 minutes or whatever, you had to, or 2 hours, 2.5 hours, you had to get it on 2 VHSs. So, you had Prince Caspian on one and Voyage of the Dawn Treader on the second VHS, and it cut out, I think that was the only thing it cut out, but it did cut out the sea serpent.
Now see, I
So I
had
did
the
not know it
two-part
was
VHS.
done. I had no idea that anyone had adapted the sea serpent
That's
other than the
funny.
Walden version, so it
So
was kind
it
of
just ended
hilarious
with a
to see.
cliffhanger. Oh no, it's a sea serpent. And then you pick up the next episode or the rest of the movie and then he's not there
Well, no, it didn't have any of those, breaks. So
at all. Oh wow.
it was edited as one movie.
Well, yeah, and that's how I saw it. I didn't even know it was a miniseries at
And I
first. It's like
think I think
it's a
the
movie.
way, like, for example, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe version that someone gave us, it had one break because it was 2 VHS tapes, and so they did include the end credits for the end of, like, the first half, which would have been, because it was 6 episodes, so probably 3 episodes in. It included that break, for episodes, but then it didn't have, like, the end credits, and then it just starts up the next episode. It just basically was like a part 1, part 2 with end credits for part 1, and then starts off with the
Yeah,
for
yeah.
part 2.
I still like that musical theme. Interesting because, of course, we're not talking about Narnia per se this time, but I believe there was at one point a Fellowship of the Ring theatrical edition VHS release. This is how old we are. I mentioned at the top of this show, Fellowship of the Ring, the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, the 2001 film is now 20 years old, everyone, and it is old. How old is it? It is so old that it did have a VHS release, and then even the even the DVD release. Remember the extended cut? They had to break that into 2 parts as well because this movie is so
Yep.
huge. You even had trouble fitting it onto the DVD. And then when they released it, re-released on Blu-ray, they kept the cut in the same place, which I think is genius. Because then you can just take the disc and swap it right into that gorgeous DVD extended release set that released in 2002. We just skipped ahead accidentally to the home release, but really, we're going to talk about chapter 1 of this discussion, stepping back, time warping back to 20 years ago, or maybe even longer ago, depending on how nerdy you are, how far enough in advance you knew this film was coming from Sir Peter Jackson. How did we discover the Lord of the Rings books and films? And I have an inkling, ha ha ha, that you are the bigger nerd in this case, and that's not an insult. That is a compliment because I was
So
late coming to this fan. What about you?
so I am a Tolkien fan on a C.S. Lewis podcast. I love C.S. Lewis. But I have probably, in terms of, like, I've read a lot of the major works of Lewis, right? Screw Tape Letters, Abolition of Man, you know, but like I just read Roverandom recently, which is one of Tolkien's children's stories. I'm actually reading some of Tolkien's other lesser known non Middle Earth fantasies right now. Um, so I probably, in some ways, I feel like I've read more of Tolkien's other non-famous works than Lewis's non-famous works. So my dad, like, I was raised on, like, the old, like, the Ralph Bakshi, Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, and those. I watched anything Lord of the Rings I could get, um, and my dad was reading them to me from a very young age. I think around age 7. I don't remember how old I was. first time we read Lord of the Rings, we got to Shelob's Lair, and I said, "It's too scary. You need to stop." And
So
then
how
we
old
waited
were
a
you
year.
then reading Lord of the Rings?
Maybe 7 or 8.
Oh,
I think he
wow.
was.
That
I
is
think
early.
he was.
All right.
He was reading them to us.
Okay.
Maybe I was closer to 7, I think. So we took a year off of the Lord of the Rings, and read Sherlock Holmes. Then we came back to Lord of the Rings after a lot of Sherlock Holmes, and I was a year older, and I could get through Shelob's Lair without it being too scary. And so we finished the book, and then I was reading the books on my own, probably at age 11. Um, and so let's see, the movie came out in 2001. The first trailer, I think, came out in 1999. Is that right? Its
I
first
believe
teaser.
so. Yeah.
It
Well,
was like the half teaser, half making of featurette.
yes. And was that the one that ended with the hero shot where all 9 members of the Fellowship are climbing up over that rock and just sort of gazing meaningfully into the middle distance? It's a
Nope.
shot that is in the film. That's not the
It
first
is in the
trailer.
film. No, that's not. No,
That
it
wasn't
had
the
some of the
teaser.
rudimentary footage from Helm's Deep. It had some of. It had.
I remember this now. Yeah.
It had. It was different. It's flipped. The shot of the Uruk-hai walking over the fields, it's flipped to reverse, and they superimposed Mount Doom in the background. And instead of the Eye of Sauron, it's or instead of the Hand of Sauron, it's Eye of Sauron. So they switched up some of the CGI a bit in that famous shot, but it's got that in there. It has uh, some of the stuff from Weathertop in there. But no, I'll send you the link. It was a pretty cool trailer. But I remember I was in my dining room, and my dad was on the computer, with his back to the window, facing east. And so I remember this.
This is
And he told me someone is making a movie of the Lord of the Rings. I thought, how's someone making a movie of the Lord of the Rings? And he showed me the teaser trailer, and I was all over the web forums. This was like the baby days of internet web.
Right, this is the late 90s. Nobody has high speed. Just for younger listeners, remember, we've got internet, but this is a primitive version of it. You could barely see any video. Yeah. Did you all use the QuickTime? It was QuickTime.movs.
You do the thing where I was lucky. We didn't have 56K. We were on dual ISDN.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So you do the thing where you select how many days am I willing to wait for this trailer download, and you set it, okay, I'm going to set it and wait like 3 days for this trailer download or whatever, to get this is the 640 by 480 version resolution. Wow. You got we can actually see the detail here. So yeah, no, I think the forum I was on most, I remember these old forums. I didn't even know if they're still around. There was ringbearer.org, which was kind of a competitor to Torn before Torn became like the thing, right?
Yeah, my wife spent a lot of time on Torn.
Yeah, I was on the Torn forums as well, a little bit. I was on fantasyvault.com, which is like a fantasy forum. So yeah, I was in all these discussions and stuff. We were discussing all the reports, and oh my goodness, Arwen at Helm's Deep. Everyone.
Oh, I remember Arwen at Helm's Deep.
No, not Tom Bombadil. He can't be missing. What are they doing? All those early discussions. I was fully involved in. I was a teenager. I was 13 when this was going on, and then I just turned 14 when the movie came out.
Okay. Yeah. See, I was a little bit later in life, so I was going to college by that point, and so I had limited access to high-speed internet. This is about 2001 when I'm actually seriously finally catching up to this. The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, released in the United States on December 19th, 2001. Very good year. Very good date. Well, not a very good year. There were some terrible terrorist attacks that happened a few months earlier, which I think, at least in terms of the mainstream culture, boosted demand for these kinds of stories. And we can get into that a little bit later.
So.
Yeah, it's a battle for good and evil. We needed a story about those classic virtues writ large.
What's funny is the kind of in politics, you don't hear postmodernism is definitely dominant in the culture today, but the common moral relativistic trope is not what's right for you is right for you, what's right for me. You don't hear that mantra so much.
No,
that was very dominant in the 2000s. You heard it a lot. Now, I'll never forget, after 9/11, my home newspaper, which was a very, very left-wing little newspaper, the front page on September 12th was a full-page photo of the Twin Towers burning and the word evil in bold
There
at
you
the top.
go.
That's all. The entire headline
Wow.
just said evil. That's
Wow.
all it said.
I don't know
And
what
I
it
thought
is,
that
but
was
I
so
know it when I see it.
I thought that was so stunning, and I think that it was very much in the minds of people. I mean, there was a whole petition online to change the name of the second movie because they knew it was going to be called The Two
That's
Towers, and they
right.
thought it was too much too soon.
Total
So
coincidence there. Yeah.
yeah, but it was yeah, it was definitely a very timely film.
Very much so. And in terms of technology, also timely because you've already mentioned some of the early internet fan movements. I dare say this is one of, if not the first film that had so much online engagement, so many involved fans. I mean, years before you and I met on Narnia Web, there were forums and other websites like the OneRing.net and a bunch of the
Yep.
others that you've mentioned. And such support, but also criticism that skipping ahead to The Two Towers, which released a year later, maybe we'll do that 20-year anniversary discussion next year. Who knows? But there was so much fan engagement there that long before release the Snyder Cut or Save Daredevil or any of the other fan movements now, you had fan backlash for certain
You did.
decisions, such as Arwen at Helm's Deep. It is correct.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. There exists an alternate timeline where Sepeta and all of those, whether they're under pressure from executives or whatever, they put action hero Arwen fighting at Helm's Deep. It ruins it. They would have ruined it. They would have ruined Arwen's character, and they certainly wouldn't have been keeping with the books.
Yeah, no, and I think the fan feedback, I think it was pretty crucial, actually.
It was.
I think that I think they saw because they talk about it in the making of featurettes. They talk about how
They do
were
very
aware of what the
openly.
fans
Very
they were
openly.
aware of what the fans, you know, were gonna tolerate and not. And it's interesting the changes that over time people kind of warmed up to. No one really talks about Bombadil anymore. Um, not as much. I mean, they talk about it. They talk about it, but not in the sense of in the sense of it being the grave sin they initially thought. Um, there's some things that I'm still hung up on, and there's some things I am much more tolerant of than I was the first time I saw it. Um, but I'm kind of getting into the later films too. I think we can stay
Right.
focused
Well,
on
it is
Philosopher's
kind of
Ring.
all the same, really. And how much can we save for any potential future episodes? We needn't think about it so much like a franchise. Something else unique about Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings film trilogy. The books, by the way, are not a trilogy, but I think can we call the films a trilogy? I think we
I
can
think you can
because
call the
the
film a
Lord of the
trilogy.
Rings is
Although,
really one book and
fortunately,
multiple chapters.
yes, it was written as their own book, but fortunately, they made the decision to film it as one film.
Exactly. Yeah,
So and
which
that was,
rather
I think,
unprecedented.
yeah. I mean, it's the huge financial gamble. I mean, now it's just a given that any successful blockbuster is going to make over $1 billion. That was not the case in 2001.
It was not.
And to spend 300 million on production for a trilogy with an unknown director, it's really one of the biggest financial gambles I think in Hollywood history, and it's amazing the payoff. And so many, I mean, and Peter Jackson made the decision to go with, I'm going to say, he went with actors instead of movie stars. There was like the famous movie star Sean Connery, who is a good actor. I'm not saying he's not an actor. But it just didn't work out. Um, yeah, it's interesting how so much could have gone wrong, and so much went well. For example, I'm way more forgiving now of Elijah Wood as Frodo. I thought he was way too young a Frodo, but you look at him now, he looks almost exactly the same. So if they had gotten a 40-year-old Elijah Wood to play Frodo, uh, it wouldn't look that much different than it does now.
Right. Insert your
Um,
Elijah Wood stole a One Ring prop and plot twist. It wasn't a prop,
right.
and it
It's
added years,
I do
prolonged
wish
his
he'd been
life.
40 years old. I do wish Elijah would have been 40 years old in the movie, but
Yes,
or
because he's a middle-aged hobbit. Frodo is. He's
yeah,
a little bit closer to Bilbo's age, and
or
hobbits are
30
long livers
even.
even without interference by supreme dark objects of evil.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I understand they're trying to portray the innocence, but I think we kind of as fans, I think in retrospect, and even then, like I think we kind of forgive choices like that, just as we understand the choice to leave out the Barrow Downs sequence. By the way, restraint by Peter Jackson, because if you go back and read it in the book, it seems like it would be totally up his alley. this strange creature. He could have gone absolutely horror movie auteur nuts with it and still been in keeping with the book. They cut it out along with Tom Bombadil. And then, of course, in Return of the King, the Scouring of the Shire, we kind of, at least speaking for me, I think a lot of fans, as well as myself, we wish that they'd been kept in there, but we kind of get that they weren't. Like, the changes they made overall seem to have been justifiable. Although, don't ask my wife about Faramir in the Two Towers. That is unforgivable.
Still unforgivable for me.
So let's pause and hide from legions of orcs and turn to confront legions of battle robots, courtesy of T.E. Bradford's novel Awakened. That's our second sponsor for this episode. Here's the back cover description for Awakened. What if your worst enemy was your only hope? What if saving your life meant destroying your beliefs? How far would you go to survive? Manufactured Anodic Commandos, or MACs, were designed for battle. Most people believe sending robotic soldiers into combat is better than risking human lives. But Kara has seen what happens when unfeeling, soulless automatons decide who lives and who dies. Machines don't care whether the enemy is holding a rake instead of a gun, or that a 6-year-old girl watches from a bedroom window. All they know is what they were programmed for: destruction. When Kara finds herself wounded and defenseless in the middle of a battle zone, she has no choice but to use the only weapon she can find: a disabled MAC. Without him, she won't make it out alive. With him, she might come out a different person. Will hate destroy her, or will the natural love of a creator for its creation open her eyes to a truth that changes everything? Get the full back cover description, purchase link, and book cover in the show notes for this episode, or go to lorehaven.com/podcast sponsors.
And there were some things that I actually had to give credit to Peter Jackson. I was never thrilled. I'm still not thrilled with Viggo Mortensen as Aragorn. I just have accepted he's a different Aragorn from the books. And I have to give Peter Jackson credit because I found out just within the last year, because I always had my dream, the dream actor for Aragorn. I thought this would have been the Aragorn from Tolkien's novel, and that would have been Daniel Day-Lewis. If you want to watch I always want to watch a movie about Strider. Go watch Last of the Mohicans. I mean, it's like it's almost like you're watching a Middle Earth film with Strider. I think Daniel Day-Lewis had the power and royalty and commanding authority, and just this image of he's experienced all these things, in this kind of this worn, experienced life that he could have brought to bear with Aragorn. Apparently, I saw it on the internet, so I know it was true. But I was reading some stuff that actually he was Peter Jackson's first choice for Aragorn.
Really?
He was, he didn't cast him because, of course, there was, I can't remember his name all of a sudden, the guy from the bad Extraordinary Gentleman movie.
Who was the other guy, Stuart something or other, who didn't work out as Aragorn?
He didn't work out. He cast him as Aragorn. He didn't work out.
First choice.
Can't think of his name all of a sudden.
Stuart Townend or something.
Stuart
like that.
Townsend.
Yes.
Yeah. Because he cast him and then realized, that was a mistake, fortunately. But no, he tried to get Daniel Day-Lewis, and Daniel Day-Lewis reportedly looked at the script and thought, well, I don't do big action blockbusters. That's not my thing. I want to do like a real character. I'm a character actor. And I think maybe Daniel Day-Lewis didn't realize what the character of Aragorn would have been. He could have, I think, fulfilled that goal with the character of Aragorn for sure. So it's unfortunate that he turned it down, because I think that would have been the icing on the cake. But Viggo Mortensen is, I think, one of the greatest actors of our time. I think he's one of the greats right now out there. It's kind of funny because he'll like retire from acting for 5 or 6 years, come back, earn an Oscar nomination, and then just go back. Like, he got an Oscar nomination for Eastern Promises. He got backed out. Then he came back for Captain Fantastic, got an Oscar nomination, backed out. It's like, now he's gone again.
Yeah, he's gone off at a ranch somewhere. He's hunting wild boar. He's skinning it himself by the fire and taming wild horses. Yeah,
he's shooting his black and white photography,
and then kicking a helmet and breaking his toe. As everybody.
Yeah.
Now it's now such a meta joke now among fans. They're laughing at ourselves for pointing out, like, oh, that one scene in the Two Tower, Viggo Mortensen kicked the helmet, and then he starts yelling and he collapses to his knees. Like, that's because he actually broke his toe. And then everyone else in the room is groaning and rolling their eyes and just wishing we could watch the movie in peace.
No, I'm still not huge on Arwen. at the river. I still think
ranger called off
I know.
his guard.
I know. But they were still on the track for the Two Towers, her being at Helm's Deep at that point when they were editing and making
You
it.
know,
But
I hadn't thought about that. That's true.
I have to say that I think that Ralph Bakshi's Lord of the Rings film, which if anyone's ever seen it, is made in 1978 when it came out, and it basically is the first two Lord of the Rings movies. Like it ends at the Helm's Deep, after the Helm's Deep ending with the climax there, where Gandalf returns with Erkenbrand, actually, because they
Not Eomer?
not because they stay a little closer to the book in that regard. But he had Legolas coming. I think he had the similar problem that Peter Jackson had with, I don't want to introduce Glorfindel. He's this big, powerful elf lord. People ask, why doesn't he go on the quest? It's kind of these different questions that fans ask as you're watching a film. And he said, I'm going to have Legolas be the guy who comes and rescues him at the ford, which still kind of makes some sense, right?
Yes.
That wouldn't be too crazy. I think that was a more correct decision than having Arwen, for sure.
Well,
So
that
I'm
makes
still
sense.
kind of, because it still seems kind of inconsistent with her character. People forget in the early days of the script, Arwen was part of the Fellowship.
Oh my!
That's what the
Please do
studio
not
wanted.
remind
They
me
wanted,
of
They wanted
this.
Arwen they wanted Arwen as part of the Fellowship, and she was part of the Fellowship in some script iterations.
Yeah,
But
well, the studio got their way with similar impulses later on in the Hobbit trilogy by shoehorning in a completely extra book female elf character, played admirably, and yet was just unfortunately
Yes,
not one of the downer moments of the Hobbit series.
I own the entire Hobbit extended version, and
Same.
so I have no guilt about having a certain fan edit
Oh dear!
that I can recommend to you.
Okay, yeah.
After this podcast. But
We
anyway,
need to talk about that off air. Yeah. So,
but anyway, no, I have to say when I went to see the theater, like I think I saw it. I don't know if I saw it opening night because this was back in the days of like true midnight showings, and I was 14.
yeah.
And of course, my dad, who had been a Lord of the Rings fan longer than I was not about to, he's not going to let his son see it before he did. So we went like, maybe not opening night, but like the next night, right? Like the first evening showing.
You've still outgeeked me because I think I saw it like maybe within a week of its release because I still had to catch up on the book. You know, I had never read the book before.
And my parents, they thought about it and they did decide that my 5-year-old brother was probably too young to see it.
Agreed. As co-author of the Pop Culture Parent, I agree.
Yeah. They said 5. I said, that's probably a little too young. They said, but he'll be 6 when the VHS comes out and he can watch it then.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, every child is different.
which he completely wigged out and loved it at age 6.
That's incredible. That is incredible.
Yeah. So I have to say, like, so in preparation for this episode, because I used to watch Lord of the Rings every year, and then I kind of held off for a few years just because I wanted it to be more fresh, and so I do that now.
Exactly.
Watch
yes.
Like
Plus, if you wait long enough, you get a higher resolution release in whatever upgraded storage.
I don't have a 4K TV, so I need to actually.
I got a 4K last year because Zack Snyder's Justice League.
I have the theatrical versions in 4K.
The theatrical. Okay.
I did wait till our son went to bed because he's 2, and I'll start him when he's. I'll start him young, but not at 2. So
just at age 5, maybe
I did
6.
watch bits because I'm going to rewatch them with my wife. Last night in preparation for this podcast, I'm going to watch just a few scenes from the Fellowship of the Ring to kind of like refresh my memory. So I watched the opening into like Gandalf meeting Bilbo, and I watched the scene with Saruman and Gandalf's confrontation. I watched the Bridge of Khazad-dûm, and I watched the ending of the film, the breaking of the Fellowship, through the end credits, and it really brought back so many memories. I remember just feeling, I think that it hit me with the prologue, with the Last Alliance and the fight against Sauron. I mean, I was just in awe in theaters. I thought they did it. I mean, I think that was the first thing that hit me. I thought, holy cow, they pulled it off. Like, I didn't know what was going to happen. I knew there were going to be. I still knew in the back of my mind.
So we're going back to December when you saw it first, not when you rewatched it. But
correct.
Okay, all right. So let me just cue this up real quick. This is chapter 2 now. How did we experience the Fellowship of the Ring in December 2001? Everything's a little wibbly wobbly, timey wimey. Good fans, true fans will remember that early experience and the amazement of it, and then translate that to the present and then back again. And so I think for me, my wife and I rewatched Fellowship again in 4K just a few weeks ago. Finally managed to get it up on the 4K screen. And for those who are holding out and maybe getting the set, yeah, definitely get it if you can, because they fixed a lot of the color issues that were going on in the Blu-ray release. I don't know what was going on there. It was just green everywhere from what I remember, especially for the Fellowship. But going back, you just, at least I was able to recapture some of that thrill of seeing these events on the movie screen in that theater in December 2001. So you were referring to that moment then of seeing the prologue. It began with the forging of the great rings, or whatever the quote goes. Galadriel's narrating, like, how are you at age 14 or 15? Like, what can you remember
14.
about seeing this? Okay.
I was 14. I remember just the thrill of seeing the dwarves on screen with the 9 rings and the 7 rings, and the Last Alliance. I was still thrilled with the Last Alliance because I'm a big Silmarillion fan. I love the Silmarillion, and of course the Silmarillion is more of the first age, not the second age, which the Last Alliance is at the end of the second age. But I loved seeing that. I thought it was so cool. I thought the way that they pulled off the elves fighting, it's just all these little subtle things that they did, like the fact that when the elves release their arrows, they're standing like 3 or 4 rows back, but they're accurate enough they just shoot right past Elrond's head, and he doesn't even flinch. Just little things like that were so cool. And I'm also I'm a historical and competitive fencer in the past, and so I was into weaponry and actual sword fighting, and I was riding horses at that point a lot. I was still riding horses regularly at that stage of my life. So I was trying to live Middle Earth, and it was so cool to see it come to life. I remember like actually feeling kind of, because I was 14, I hadn't seen a lot of violent films and stuff. Like it was kind of horrifying seeing Sauron like kill all those elves and then like with one sweep of the mace. I mean, I remember actually getting this kind of shudder of like horror with the violence of that. Right, in some ways, like that was the most violent reaction I ever had in watching the movies. But it was just incredible. I can remember seeing the Balrog for the first time and rolling my eyes to seeing Arwen on screen and the cheesy line that we knew was coming, because I think that line made it on early was right, and so we thought, oh great, But
it's much better when she's praying for Frodo to survive, and then you hear the chorale even reference the mighty Valar. It's a reference to that spiritual depth of Middle Earth. You've got to get in, or at least they felt they had to get in these kind of, oh, well, we're a blockbuster movie, so we got to get in our blockbuster movie shtick. And all the fans roll their eyes, and Legolas's action hero moments later, and Arwen being the strong female character, TM, just completely unnecessary, by the way. You get Eowyn later, you can get your jollies there in the 2 hours RTK.
I actually think that I actually feel in hindsight they did Eowyn a disservice. I think she wasn't strong enough in the films. I think that, going to just jump a little forward to Return of the King, reading the book, you read the book, she's a lot more steely-eyed in the book facing down the Witch King than she was in the movie.
No, that is true. They make her more vulnerable in the film version.
Yes, she was more vulnerable. I would have had her be a little less vulnerable in the film version. Have her be a little stronger of a female character. That's one of my frustrations with her. Although up to that point, Miranda Otto does a fantastic job as Eowyn. But no, there was so many great things they did, and what was incredible to me were the moments where they were able to come up with dialogue that, in some ways, I mean, the books aren't perfect. They're about as perfect, I mean, short of the Bible, as you're going to get.
Yes.
But even like Boromir's death scene with Aragorn, the dialogue is better than the book, I'm going to say. You read the book after watching the movie, and there's not many instances of that, but there are a few. And the fact that they were able to pull off bits of that. One thing I realized, because I thought, what scenes do I want to rewatch? Because I wanted to save the movie experience, like to rewatch it with my wife. Like I was even watching last night, and she was, she put our 2-year-old to bed, and she was in the kitchen, and she like walked past and saw the Balrog scene. She just kind of says, as she's walking by, she goes, I think this is one of the most memorable film scene experiences I've ever had in my life, was the Balrog scene. And I said, do you want me to pause it so you can come back and watch it with me? She goes, yes.
There you go.
And my wife's not the huge fan.
Brother.
Yeah, she's not the huge fan that I am.
Still.
But just things like that. And I think one thing I realized, because for some reason I thought, I want to rewatch some scenes, kind of remember. So again, I watched the prologue through to like, Gandalf meeting Bilbo, watched Gandalf and Saruman fighting. I watched the Balrog in the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. I watched and I thought, oh well, maybe I shouldn't watch these scenes. And these are the scenes I really want to watch real quick, but I really want to watch character development scenes. Maybe I should watch those instead. But then I realized every single one of those
Is
scenes
a character development.
they are character development scenes, and that's
Yes.
one reason why the film works so well. I mean, you watch really the whole bit; it's so well done, from the Balin's tomb to the Bridge of Khazad-dûm. They don't feel like mindless action scenes. Watching it again, well, if we're still kind of on the how do we watch it, back then, like that was kind of my first take was, oh my goodness, they pulled it off. Yeah, and I knew it wasn't going to be perfect. I was never expecting perfection. I was just wondering, can they, as a whole, pull it off? I still think that summary, the best summary of the films is from Dr. Michael Ward, who's a friend of mine, and he told me one time, I think we were in Oxford and we were discussing the films, and one of our friends, a mutual friend of ours, she still does not like the films, still has not forgiven them she just doesn't like the films at all. Her husband egg her on like, oh, I think movies.
But the films are better than the books. Wow.
Better than the books.
Ooh,
He would say, but
blasphemy.
yeah, but she was like, well, I just don't. What do you? She asked. She goes, Spud, which is Michael Ward's nickname. She goes, Spud, what do you think of the films? Yes, it's because he's bald. That's why he's called Spud. But she goes, what do you think of the films? He goes, the Lord of the Rings films are flawed and yet marvelous.
There you go.
And that I thought that is very true. And he basically said, yes, he goes, there are some cheesy moments. He goes, it's really silly when Frodo comes to after destroying the ring, and kind of the silly slow motion laughter. But he goes, that's kind of silly. Because the fact that they were able to pull off bits like the destruction of the ring, the Gandalf's rescue at Helm's Deep, the the Balrog, the different things that they really pulled off, it's really incredible, and we take it for granted now. But I think that was kind of my first take was there's some definite flaws that will always be flaws that I will never warm up to, and these films are still marvelous.
I would agree with that, and I think that is a great way to view any kind of fantastical story that is flawed yet marvelous. And it always helps me to run through a little imagined simulation of what if it was the perfect film? What if you're sitting there watching a perfect film, no cheesy lines, no differences from your memory of the book, any of that? Well, then you would never want to leave. That a perfect film would be worthy of worship. And as a Christian, we're not supposed to worship anything perfect other than Jesus Christ. So it's actually a little bit of a mercy that they put in some cheesy dialogue, or maybe an actor who's not exactly like the character that you remembered from the book. That to me, actually, I think makes the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, better, because it is human. It's a story about flawed people trying to do heroic things, and it's being made by flawed people trying to do heroic things. And I saw then, and I continue to see now, the common grace of our author, Jesus Christ, in the making of this story. You have so many things that could have gone wrong, and not just, Arwen could have shown up at Helm's Deep, but you could have had a far more shallow, more Hollywood look at the book, of the level of the original speculation about making the Lion, Winch, and Wardrobe. Remember the old myth? It was going to be, they're going to be in Los Angeles, and Edmund's going to be tempted by hot dogs. That kind of just cringe Hollywood stuff. The kind of stuff that when you were growing up young and evangelical, you assumed all movies were like that. Which kind of leads me to another phase here, is that I was actually reading an article by a guy named Samuel James, who had written a kind of a perspective on his experience seeing the Fellowship of the Ring, and just casting that in the bigger picture of the evangelical Christian community, and how much Christians in particular, especially those who knew about Tolkien and knew the Inkling story and knew Middle-earth, how much they were looking forward to this film, and how thrilled and relieved these professional Christian Middle-earth fans felt when the first film got it right. And then, of course, later on, largely, the second and third films also got it right. And this he was writing about, and I should include this link in the show notes for this episode. This was kind of a pivotal moment for a lot of Christians in recognizing, okay, first, there's still great things in popular culture. non-Christian creators are still blessed with common grace gifts, and they can adapt a story with goodness and beauty and truth like this. But also, that means that fantasy itself is something that Christians can enjoy. This is not just infested by occult magic. It is something through
Right.
which we can directly worship Jesus and then come back from that experience in the fantasy world and see our world a little bit differently, a little bit more epically, a little bit more gospel centered. And then especially in those months after September 11th, and everyone's talking about good versus evil and what do you do
East
when
versus
people are
West.
invading your country. Yeah, I mean, it didn't just scratch some patriotic itch, but I think for Christians, it managed to come along and echo back a truth that we really needed to remember, not just in 2001, but for all time. That flawed people can fight evil. You've got to resist temptation by the one ring. It's not just a story
Yeah.
about you, but it is a good and righteous and wise story that Tolkien wrote. And the fact that people in the early 21st century could adapt it so well for the screen was a source of great encouragement to me personally, even though I just read the book like within the last few weeks. I finally managed to finish it. And then, by the way, my my younger brother had only read the Fellowship of the Ring book, so a certain character's death at the end of the film took him by
Oh,
surprise. Unfortunately, I had already started reading the Two Towers book, so I had covered it just enough to not be surprised.
that would be frustrating if you're yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah,
I largely agree with what you said, although I would push back on one thing where you
do.
said, well, there it was encouraging that there was enough goodness in pop culture still. I would say actually uh I think what encouraged people was there was enough appreciation in pop culture for these values. Um because pop culture didn't I think that was the thing is pop culture didn't really offer a lot of this. But I think people realized, oh, there was enough appreciation in pop culture for these values of beauty and truth. Um, and I think the Lord of the Rings films were made in a narrow window, where the technology was like they couldn't have been made in the early 90s.
No, couldn't do a cave
But
troll or
but
Balrog or any
they
of those things.
but they also the scripts wouldn't have survived today. The castings wouldn't have survived today. Things are too politicized, especially with anything deemed to be a blockbuster.
Yeah,
Um, a lot of things are too politicized today, and Peter Jackson specifically said, "Well, I've got my own political beliefs." He goes, "I didn't want that impacting the film." He goes, "People don't care about my
good
political
for
beliefs."
him.
He
Good
said
for him.
we specifically wanted to keep it. What would Tolkien's vision be? And he said, maybe we got it wrong from time to time, but we were trying to give Tolkien's vision, even if we didn't do it perfectly. And that was a goal that I don't know if a lot of people would have today.
Well, when you go out on the road, whether it's Middle Earth or any other fantasy land, there's no telling what you will find. Andrew D. Meredith's novel Thrice is our third sponsor for this episode. In his story, we find the cave of a bear and people who are trying to destroy a small boy. Here's the back cover. Forced out on the road with the boy left in his care, Jovan determines to journey into the cave of the bear to seek out those that would do him and his boy harm. It is the boy and his bottomless well of soul-searing magic that they seek. They would do anything to exploit it, and Jovan would do anything to stop them. This is book 1 of the Needle and Leaf series from author Andrew D. Meredith. Here's an endorsement from Graham McNeil, who's a New York Times bestselling author of 1,000 Suns. McNeil says, quote, steeped in a wealth of brooding Slavic folklore, Thrice is a deeply personal story of a reluctant father and the mysterious child in his care. It beautifully weaves a tale of personal survival with a much grander narrative of ill-fated bargains and dangerous magic of the past to tell a story that's both intimate and epic. End quote. You can find that info, the purchase link, and the book cover for Andrew D. Meredith's Thrice by going to the show notes for this episode or lorehaven.com/podcast sponsors.
I don't know if you follow the Nerdrotic podcast at all. He covers like all these different franchises. I think, how do you have enough time to consume this much material?
I wonder
'Cause
that
it
about
seems like
every popular cultural podcast that's clearly
yeah,
being
but it's
made
like
by
he's
someone
like,
who's not
he's
doing
talking
it
about the
full
latest
time.
James Bond film. He's talking about Dune. He'll talk about Marvel. I'm like,
And then
how do you
watching
have time
all
to
the
watch all
streaming
this stuff?
series at once. It must be a dark
Yes,
room with
it's
like
like that
17
Andy.
different screens at once.
It's like that Andy Sandberg Emmys, video where he opened up with like, how do you have time for all these mini shows? He just Andy Sandberg locks himself in a bunker, for a year, 24/7 consuming stuff. But no, he said he was talking about the Lord of the Rings TV show, which at some point we may discuss, and he was talking about some of the directions of it, and he said, I can't believe it's gotten to this. He goes, I am an agnostic, and I find myself fiercely defending the Roman Catholic Tolkien.
Oh, there you go. Hacked your imagination, didn't they?
And he said, he says, look, he goes, I'm an agnostic because these are religious books. He goes,
yes.
He said, they're informed by a religious perspective on the world.
Absolutely. And, not allegorical. Tolkien despised it in all its forms, correct. But it was certainly meaningful and reflecting the reality that not only Tolkien experienced, but that we all experience.
I'm sort of speechless still sometimes as I try to sum up the films, but because they're hard to sum up, just like the books are hard to sum up. But there's so many good things about the films. Someone asked me recently, they said, family member asked me, like, what's your favorite film? The Lord of the Rings.
And yes, all one film.
And they, as one film, yeah. And they said, really? Why? I said, well, because it's the stuff of life. It's got everything. It's got good and evil. It's got hope and sadness and tragedy and new life and death. And it's got all kinds of things. It's really the stuff of life. Someone asked my dad, do you think some of these actors will get pigeonholed after these roles? My dad said, no. And they said, do you think Elijah Wood will get pigeonholed after? He goes, no. He'll because it has everything. It's not like it's just a comedy role or it's just a drama. It's got everything of life in there. And so it's really one of those films. And I was thinking there's a great book that was just published by Rod Dreher called Live Not by Lies, and it's a series of interviews. You're nodding like you've read it.
Well, I've read his first book, or well, not his first book, but I'm still reading the Benedict option, mostly so I can read Live Not by Lies. I mean, it's not a franchise, the Dreher verse, but I still kind of want to read them in order.
But it's a series of, it's a book by him, but it's also includes a lot of interviews, bits of interviews or summaries of interviews with people who survived in the Eastern Bloc under Soviet Union. And I was struck by one family who the mother would read to her children the Bible a lot, but read a lot of fantasy. And he said, how much would you? He said, yeah. They said, my mother would read to us every day. So how long would she read every day? He said, 3 hours a day. I said, really, 3 hours a day? He said, yeah, she'd read all the time. And he said, what were the most notable works? And they said the most notable works, or the most impacting works that they read to us were the Lord of the Rings. And he said, why Tolkien? And I think she said, because we knew that Mordor was real. We knew that all these things that he would write about, they were real. They were not just made up. And that's partly why I like the Lord of the Rings maybe more than the Chronicles of Narnia. It is a darker book. I mean, if you want to think, I want to go on a vacation. Where do you want a vacation?
Oh, Narnia, clearly.
It's like you want a vacation in Narnia. It's like, well, maybe we'll have you drop you off in Middle Earth. Well, where in Middle Earth? I mean, in Narnia,
just Rivendell, Rivendell.
Yeah,
Rivendell.
Else. There's a few places.
The Shire, pre-scouring.
The Shire, Lothlorien. Well, where in Mirkwood are you dropping me off? I mean, so that's but it's not really a secret that my wife and I, our oldest son, died 2 years ago, very unexpectedly. And so I think that seeing that, like one of the first films that we watched was The Lord of the Rings, when we were able to watch movies again. It was The Lord of the Rings because all those things felt relatable, and it felt like it wasn't just cotton candy. It wasn't just a fun. Yes. You don't want just a pure escape of, well, because at some point you don't want to escape what feels real. Maybe you want to get away a little bit, but at some point you don't want to escape what feels really real and important. You don't want to escape when grief, when sadness, when darkness and evil feel not just real but important in what's going on in your life. You don't want to feel like you're forgetting it. It doesn't feel comforting to forget those things for a couple hours. So that's why I think The Lord of the Rings spoke to us and still
yeah. And we've already crossed over into chapter 3, 20 years later. How do we view the film and its fandom? You've already really been speaking about those emotional results. And that reminds me of back last spring when my dad died, I would just listen to excerpts of the soundtrack by Howard Shore, particularly
Oh, same.
the ending of The Return of the King. And I mean, that's how I discovered the films originally, really, was I'd been keeping up with movie soundtracks. I'm stepping back to 2001 real quick. I'd been keeping up with movie soundtrack websites where it's like you would get excerpts from the CD tracks on Real Player. You'd have to have the Real Player plugin. And everybody was talking about this, the soundtrack by a guy named Howard Shore for Fellowship of the Ring,
A guy we'd
and
never heard of.
and that we never heard of. Like, I
He
think he
produced
did
one
like
of the best
SNL,
musical
like he
scores of all
maybe led the
time.
SNL band or something, and
I
and
know.
I start listening to this music and I'm just absolutely transported. And I play no musical instruments whatsoever. That is my confession, but I love this kind of music. And once I heard that score, I realized that this is a story I think that I could get into, like not just seeing the film, but I've got
Mhm.
to read the book. And I'd heard about the book from casual acquaintances and stuff. Believe it or not, the name of the land, Middle Earth, threw me off, especially because there was a old 80s or 70s version of the cover which showed, I think it was from The Hobbit, which showed Bilbo in the cave with Gollum looking in complete 80s horror mode there, and of course it's in a cave. So for some reason I thought, is this whole land set like underground? Like, I don't know, feels kind of cramped and claustrophobic. I don't know if I'm gonna like this. That's completely the illustrator's fault there for putting me off trying the novel. But catching back up to the present, now, of course, Middle Earth is bigger, than some land underground or something. Like you said, it enlarges our view of the real world and it helps us to confront those realities, including, the death of a family member. And I'm listening to the Into the West song and just, crying my eyes out
Great
at
song.
night. Yeah,
Great song.
wonderful, wonderful song. And you mentioned earlier how these films came at just the right moment. Like the technology was just advanced enough to be able to pull off creatures like Gollum, or
Yeah.
vast settings like in Mount Doom or Minas Tirith, but not so advanced that it would encounter this kind of political cause juking that people are doing increasingly with blockbuster movies now, or just trying to wring every last drop of gold out of the franchise. Has sometimes
Yeah.
been unfairly accused of the MCU, and some of those big budget series like that. It got in at just the right time, not just for the society, but also for us. And I think now, 20 years later, we've had multiple re-releases of Fellowship of the Ring, as well as its sequels. You got it, as I mentioned, on VHS, on DVD, and then you got the extended edition, which we haven't even mentioned
Yeah.
yet. The theatrical cut, 3 hours long. And then the extended edition comes out, 20 minutes of extra scenes. You actually get to see the elves of Lothlorien give all of the gifts to each member of the fellowship. You get to see where Sam's rope came from, and you get to see where Legolas got his daggers, and all of this
Yeah.
really niche stuff, but very meaningful stuff, meaningful to those who are familiar with the books. That to me, I think, was also unprecedented. Is that this idea that there's more of the story out there, and I think it just kind of contributed to that expansive feeling of Middle Earth. And then eventually, Two Towers and Return. Well, Two Towers theatrical is 3 hours. Return of the King, they couldn't get it to 3 hours. They had to do it
Yeah.
was going to be 3 hours, 20 minutes, and then the extended version is like a whole extra hour longer. And that, I think, just that impression of always more helps to grow the fan base. And then 20 years later, you've got memes everywhere. It was hard to watch The Fellowship, my wife and I, and in Two Towers, because you keep seeing the meme moments. They're taking the
I
hobbits
know.
to
I
Isengard and,
know.
and
I
all the
know.
rest.
I know.
Legolas is in a lot of the
What's
memes. Gollum's in a
amazing
lot of the memes. Yeah, it's
what
nuts.
struck me, well, first of all, I had recently rewatched The Hobbit, certain version of The Hobbit,
I
but
see. Wink,
we
wink. Uh-huh.
we
Yeah.
but the what struck me is I was like, "This is like a film for grown-ups." It ages so well, the special effects age so well. It's amazing how much better the special effects are than in the Hobbit films overall. Um, and it's and, you watch what's funny is you watch, like, the cartoons, especially the 1978 Lord of the Rings, it's like all these 1970s hairstyles on the characters. Um, this doesn't look different then like
No,
20 years later. 20 years
no,
later, it's
it,
not
it
like you're
doesn't
like,
look
oh
like a
yeah, this was
2001
oh
movie that
yeah,
was made
there's
in the
an
late
early
90s.
2000s movie,
Yeah, yeah.
and so
Everybody's in black leather and slow motion because we've all got to be the Matrix now.
yeah, you don't have that. So it's very timeless. It's much more artistic in how it's done. I'm kind of struck by how well because I remember at the time thinking, how well will this movie age? Because some movies, like the later Harry Potter movies, are aging much better than the first two or
Oh,
three.
definitely,
The
definitely.
first couple, especially, are not aging well.
Yeah,
Um,
Prisoner of Azkaban has aged magnificently. I think
yes,
not visual effects were caught up. It was just a very contemporary and yet timeless sense that was adapted. And then
it was more
everyone
of an
after that
artistic
is aged
take on
better.
the film, on the book. It was more of
Yeah,
a true adaptation, not
right.
just
The
a
only thing that's not aged
regurgitation.
well is the movie Thor, where everybody's suddenly in long hair for some reason. They're like, oh yeah, you
I
were
know.
made in the mid 2000s. I can tell.
Yeah. Everyone, like, instantly had long hair. That was sort of
Yeah, well,
that was
I mean,
funny.
that was the goal of the filmmakers for Fellowship and the Rest is to be timeless. There's no, synth sounding, late '90s, early 2000s end credits song. Like they're
Yeah.
very intentional about that, which by itself, I think, also tributes the motives of the creators to get as close as possible to that sense of timelessness that Tolkien captured. They weren't trying to modernize it. They wanted to be respectful to the past, and that comes through not just in the story, but in the story behind the stories. Respect for the past. The world did not begin the day you were born or the day that you got woke or whatever. There is wisdom in the past. There are traditional virtues that are worth fighting for. There's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo. It is based. Lord of the Rings is what they call now based, just respectful of those traditional values, family, the Shire, all of those things, the nobility of the king. Like, obviously, they give Aragorn more of a character arc where he's not sure he wants to be
Right.
king at first, but it's more about, well, man is so flawed. Why should I be king? Maybe I should just be a ranger. Um, at least the changes that they made, I think, are at least in keeping with the spirit of the books, with some exceptions, like what's this, a ranger caught off his guard, or Legolas's action
Yeah.
hero moments.
And there's so much that does come through, like the and I'll say so. I reread the books after our son died, and there's a lot that really stands out as far as just how people are affected by different experiences. Of course, and the movies did a very good job capturing how Frodo is permanently wounded by carrying the ring, and he's not able to enjoy life the same way after, um, which I can relate to. And even after, there's a part in the book I'd never noticed before. It's in the Return of the King, where Merry and Pippin are discussing Gandalf, who's reborn, and Pippin says, "Oh, he's not very different, is he?" And Merry says, "Oh, yes, he is." Merry says, "How is he different?" He says, "He's more quick to anger. He's more
Yeah.
quick to laugh." Um, just little lines like that after Gandalf's death, and because it is an actual death and rebirth, and that's one of the great things about the movie is they actually do kill Gandalf. Um, and they don't do like a little wink, wink, nod, nod. Oh, he might come back. They actually treat it for what it should be, what it was in the book was a real moment of mourning. Um, and it's still one of the best, even though he comes back, it's one of the best death scenes
Oh
in the
yeah, I
film.
still
I
I
think I think
still
the
weep at
best
that
death
when he goes down. Fly, you
yeah,
fools,
I
and
think the
Frodo
best death
screaming.
scene
It
is
works.
Boromir. I think the
Oh,
best death scene is
definitely.
Boromir.
Yes.
It's incredible, but those moments where, because even with the Gandalf bit, I relate to that because I feel like after our, son died, I feel like I'm a little quicker to get angry. I'm a little quicker to laugh at a joke. It's very strange, but, um, my just the wisdom that Tolkien had in his life experiences, uh comes through in the film, and all 3 films, and it's it's not perfect, because there's some things maybe I wish were emphasized a little more. It's not quite as clear in the films that the hobbits are the ones who are resistant to the ring because they don't desire power. I think that's there in the films. It's just not quite as emphasized as it is, not as clear as it is in the books.
Right. It could be in the
Um,
commentary for the films, even if it's not voiced in the dialogue. You may
right,
see it,
right.
but not be told it.
Um, yes. So, um, there's so much there, and I'm still very quick to criticize Faramir, the changes to Faramir. Um, And I know why they did what they did, but I think they still completely missed the mark because I don't think it actually accomplished their new goal of what they were trying to accomplish. But uh, really, Arwen's like the main thing in in the Fellowship of the Ring. Because in
Yeah,
many ways, the Fellowship of the
she's
Ring
the
is the
only
best
glitch.
adaptation of the book. Um, and even though there were the other two work as films, like the Two Towers, I don't know which is the best film. I've wondered. Sometimes I wonder if the Two Towers might be the best standalone film, not the best adaptation, but I've wondered sometimes if that might be the best film. I don't know. I go back and forth, and I kind of like that I go back and forth. It tells me there's not a clear dud there
Right.
in
The only
in the
reason
film
why The Two
trilogy.
Towers wasn't nominated for so many Academy Awards is because The Fellowship had gotten, what was it? I forget if it was 11 nominations and I forget what the exact ratio was of
I think it was
nominations
13
versus awards.
nominations.
Return of the King, I
We
thought,
all
got
know why
13.
they didn't get the Oscar for Best Picture because everyone knew in the back of their mind they were gonna give it to The Return of the King. Everyone knew. It was very
Yeah.
predictable.
Yeah. If
Everyone knew
they
that,
kept going on
and
that
we knew
course, yes.
they knew they would feel guilty if they gave Howard Shore 3 Oscars. They were gonna feel
Yes.
guilty if they did that, so they decided to not give him 3
Yeah. There's
Oscars. They
just,
knew they'd feel guilty if they gave Peter Jackson 3 Oscars for what was filmed as one movie, because it wasn't Godfather 1, 2, and 3. It was actually filmed, put together in production as one film, and I honestly think that's why, because the the Academy was going to feel guilty about giving out that many
right.
Oscars.
And that I think was the last time, and other observers have noted this, but I think this was the last time really you had such a popular franchise in a, it's a genre picture, it's fantasy. I mean, that basically now all fantasy franchises now are just superheroes, not so much traditional fantasy with
Right.
swords and horses and things. But back then it was so new and it broke down so many barriers. Among them, the divide between the high literature and the movies are supposed to be high literature and things,
Yeah.
and then okay, we'll toss a visual effects award at Marvel Studios, for their one of their 14 flicks they released in the last year. We'll keep them happy and pacified over there. But Avengers is never going to win a Best Picture. Well, Return of the King did win a Best Picture and deservedly. And it was the last time I think I remember caring about the Academy Awards or any of those things
Yeah.
because not just because that's my fandom, but because this is a franchise that the masses loved. It was wildly popular. And yet it was also had that lasting artistic merit. And I think you
Yeah.
see that reflected as we draw to a close here, but you see that reflected in many other films that want to be the Lord of the Rings in at least some way, either
And
fantastical or visual effects or big battles or whatever.
Hollywood's been elitist for forever, and very distant from regular people. But there was at least enough of with the Academy, there was enough of a recognition that back then it was like, you know what, Gladiator was super popular. It's okay that might also be a
That's
fantastic,
true.
well-made movie.
Gladiator was 2000, right? Ridley
You
Scott?
I think 99, maybe it was 2000. Maybe it was
Okay.
2000. I think it was the 2000 Academy Awards. I think it came out, it's like the next year, right? For the
I think
is it
so. Yeah.
February?
2000,
Yeah, so like
2001.
for the previous year, whatever. Yeah, so I think it came out in 99. The Academy is like 2000. And same with Braveheart got a Academy Award, nominated the same year as Apollo 13, which should have won over Braveheart in my opinion. But people realize like, hey, those are great films. They're popular. They're also well made. And there was kind of this, hey, it's okay for these things to maybe line up once in a while. Now there's not really that idea
Right.
anymore.
Very
And
neat divide now.
in some ways, I kind of wonder if they're right. Because a lot of the films that are kind of crafted by committee now. Let's see, let's please this group. We'll please this group. We'll
And we'll
cater
give
to this,
Disney the Best
cater to this
Animated Film
demographic,
Award
and we'll cater to this
again.
demographic. We'll cater to this demographic. Let's manufacture a film that's the least offensive,
Yeah.
as little offensive as possible, and like
We don't want to offend China after all.
yeah. Let's make sure. Okay, we'll put this thing in there, but we'll make sure we can cut it out for this country, so we don't offend them. And then we kind of craft these films by committee now, and create these products instead of these artistic pictures, which The Lord of the Rings was. And it was kind of I saw this bit. It was a New York Times journalist. I retweeted it on my Twitter account. I don't remember her name, but she's like I don't even know if she's like a film reviewer for the New York Times, but she retweeted or tweeted out last year. Well, I just rewatched the Lord of the Rings films, and it hit me sadly that I had just watched the peak of cinema.
Wow.
And that it basically wasn't ever going to get better than this. And I'm like, sadly, I think she's right.
It could be. I mean, we've had other great films though that borrowed at least from this tradition. Now, the Lord of the Rings films borrow from Tolkien's tradition, which borrowed from a more ancient tradition of storytelling, the northernness, the mythology, all of this. Everybody's borrowing from everyone else, but then you also have 1 or 2 degrees removed, like even some superhero movies. I borrow to some extent from at least the big battle scenes of Middle Earth. The Avengers have this big Middle Earth style clash in Wakanda, and then of course at the very end in Endgame, that's at least an epic battle with stakes, and people are dying and stuff, and yet it is definitely more popular level. It's definitely more by committee.
It is, and it's also especially like the little like, oh yes, we're gonna have we'll get a cameo for every hero holding the Infinity Gauntlet. We can't miss someone, and then we're gonna have like, oh, all the female heroes ended up on the battlefield at the
Yes,
exact same
yes.
spot of the battlefield. Okay,
And there's
so
not a lot of meaning there other than fan service or response to studio notes, and you can see the seams there, where they've patched in some things they're clearly designed for
right.
pleasing fans, and not always in a way that brings meaning. Like I'm good with pleasing fans. Legolas
Right.
taking down a Mumakil, and that still only counts as one. That's total fan service. But by
Right.
then, I think they've earned it overall,
That's the
because
question. Did they
the
earn
rest of
it?
the film, the rest of the film has meaning that is deeper and more transcendent and more timeless.
Yeah.
I think that the closest that I've seen, and of course I'm on brand here, I would say that the closest I've seen to borrow successfully from the Lord of the Rings was actually Zack Snyder's Justice League, which was originally pitched, I believe, as the Lord of the Rings with superheroes. You get obviously, DC hero world, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, The Flash, Cyborg, and Aquaman. These are our 6 heroes, but they are at least trying to capture a feeling like that, where it's our world only with superheroes and aliens and Atlanteans and such like, but there is a similar regard for the past. And I mean, you've got a prologue type scene with a Sauron like character and everything. And frankly, I'm sitting there earlier this year and I'm getting some of those same vibes. Like, wow, you respect the Lord of the Rings films like the Lord of the Rings films respected the Lord of the Rings books. And it carries forward that regard for ancient truth and wisdom and heroism. And so I think the Fellowship's legacy will continue, even if it's just everybody borrowing from everybody else, so long as you understand what made it work. It wasn't just technology, it wasn't just really good casting or the beauty of New Zealand, or the skill of the Weta Workshop craftspersons. It was the regard for the meaning of the story. And Christian fans know that that meaning ultimately comes from the gospel. And that's where Tolkien was getting it, Catholic or otherwise. He regarded the creator, capital C, and had that theology of subcreation and new catastrophe and everything that could have only come from a biblical worldview.
I have to ask you, do you think that anyone will ever attempt to do a remake of The Lord of the Rings?
God forbid.
Do
God
you think that they will
forbid.
try? I agree with you on that. Do you
Iluvatar
think they'll try?
forbid. Probably. Amazon will try. If we want to tee that up, that could be kind of our prologue here. See, we're going to have
I don't
multiple
know if
endings,
anyone's brave enough.
multiple
I don't
endings
know
to
if
this
anyone's brave
episode.
enough. I
No,
really
I
don't.
certainly hope not. I mean,
don't
I don't
know
even
if
want them to
they had
remake
been
the Harry
made
Potter series, much less Middle Earth.
if they had been really campy and dated and like the hairstyle, like, oh yeah, there's a hairstyle from the early 2000s. I think that it would have been very likely, but I don't know if anyone would be brave enough to. Maybe if they
After
do, it'll
you and
be
I are dead,
yes, that's
they
gonna
may
be when it
try.
happens. I mean, because someone was finally got brave enough to try to remake Mary Poppins. Um and because they did the Mary Poppins Returns movie, and I've heard I think it was the writer or director talking about the pressure, and that was Mary Poppins, right? It's not the same
Well, it's
as
technically a
Lord of the Rings.
reboot
It was
sequel
a
to,
reboot, but it was
trying to ride
remaking
the
the
line
character.
there.
It was remaking the character,
That's
remaking
true.
recasting. Uh, so it's not like not even. But even then, they weren't brave enough for a true remake, which Disney likes remakes. They really want to remake all their old
Yes,
movies,
live
and they
action
and they
asterisk
were not
animated.
brave
Same thing.
enough. Disney was not brave enough to remake Mary Poppins, which says something. So I don't know if I don't. I think it will be after you and I are dead if it happens.
Well, in which case they would have probably lost all measure of connection with the virtues and the worldview from which Tolkien was drawing, and even from which
They'll
the
just
Peter
They'll
Jackson
just have
team
an
was drawing.
algorithm make the film for them.
Oh dear, maybe. Well, I thought that Peter Jackson was the horror director, but you're coming up with some pretty scary possibilities there. So there we go. Roll the credits. Roll that ethereal Inya song. We are wrapping up this episode, but stay tuned. In about 5 or 6 months or so, in stores everywhere, you can get the special extended edition of this episode, in which Rillian and I are gifted with cloaks from the Galadrim in Lothlorien. You can actually see where Frodo did this, and you can see where he actually talked with Bilbo about what they're going to do, like right in the middle of the party. All kinds of bonus features. It's amazing. There's I think even George Lucas may put some extra monsters in there. It's pretty cool. So really, and while we are spinning off wild fantasies like this, you already mentioned your Twitter. We talked about Talking Beasts. Like, where can people follow you on the interwebs?
So on the interwebs, I am at Prince_Rillian on Twitter. I'm not doing as much with my YouTube channel these days. It's a little too busy for that, and it's sometimes hard with like I'm in the playroom right now, so it's kind of hard to find a place where my wife is good with me broadcasting to the universe. Um, Best place really is at narniweb.com on our Talking Beasts podcast, where I'm one of the regular. I used to host it. Now Glumpuddle hosts it, and I'm kind of a regular on the podcast. And yeah, and I'll tweet out things once in a while.
Oh, we will tweet you and the share for this podcast when we share that. It should be, I think, our last episode before Christmas, the way that I've got it worked out. So during a busy holiday season and even a time of grief memories and all that, thank you for joining us. And just thank you for how open you are and sharing those experiences. I think that is also a great virtuous choice there in order to help people get through the holidays, which can be a rough time, kind of fight for that happiness. And it is stories like the Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring book and film, I think, that help us to do that. So Godspeed, Rillian. I wish I knew some Elvish here to send you back onto that flying horse borrowed from the other fantasy land. I guess I can just say once again, further up and further in.
Indeed, sir. Merry Christmas.
Godspeed.
So, Stephen, a favorite moment in the movies. This is really Naomi's favorite moment, but it's kind of a theme that she and I both like. It's when some people are threatening Gimli, and Legolas says, "You would die before your stroke falls." And that friendship between Gimli and Legolas, when they should hate each other, they should be on these kind of opposite sides or whatever, and how they become these very close friends through the trial they go through, the battles they go through. That's something we really like. Just this unity of different people around a common cause. We need more of that nowadays, don't we? But that was a great discussion between you and Rillian, and hope you listeners have enjoyed that. So our thanks to him, and let's go to our comm station. And we got a new message from Brielle, and she listened to episode 90, Does the Harry Potter series cast or condemn real-world dark magic? And Brielle says, quote, I highly enjoyed this episode. I was definitely raised in the anti-Harry Potter camp, but I eventually came around, actually by way of the real problem is that Harry and his friends get rewarded for breaking the rules argument. I really appreciated what you had to say about that because I never really tried to defeat that argument, and I just started reading the books. These days, I'm not going to go around praising or blanket endorsing the books, but I'll defend Rowling against silly accusations of her being a Satanist or anything of the sort. Anything she thinks too little of the supernatural and not too much. End quote. Well, that is a very fascinating thing to me. And that is, again, I'm not a reader of the books and I haven't seen the movies, but that is what really gets my attention because, after listening to that interview between you guys, Stephen, between you and Shane, it really got me thinking that, okay, so this is not a book that's really, endorsing this sort of like delve into the supernatural. That's so interesting for Brielle to say that she thinks too little of the supernatural. Now Brielle had more to say, and she went on to talk about how the books, it points to life after death. And I've come to the conclusion recently, Stephen, that I think our world right now thinks way too little of the supernatural and life after death. And it's actually even a troubling thing I've been seeing among certain groups of Christians lately, is that number one, I think there's a trend in the church that's working too much towards a earthly utopia. And number two, there is sort of ignoring of the spiritual battle that's going on around us. And we were talking about this recently among the Lorehaven staff that in response to Mike Duran's article, which we've discussed a little bit before, is that we have to be aware that we're always in a spiritual battle. Whoever the human opponents are of the church or us individually, there is a spiritual battle that's going on, and that is our true enemy. It's not flesh and blood. It's always interesting when books kind of point that out to us. Like, we're my kids are performing in A Christmas Carol right now. It's about the ghosts of Christmas past, ghosts of Christmas future, all the stuff about ghosts, and it's like, well, okay, that's not exactly right either. But again, it's that hunger for something beyond this life, for a supernatural reality. I think that's a good thing, for that desire to be awakened in us, because we live in such a materialist world right now.
I think that's a great point about A Christmas Carol. And if I've made a similar point before, I seem to have forgotten it, but I think it's a great rejoinder to the idea that a story with non-Christian elements in it, like ghosts or divination or things like that, I mean, those are not biblical practices that Christians ought to be doing, and we certainly should not endorse that kind of thing in a nonfiction context. But the Harry Potter world also has ghosts, and if we are going to be opposed to it for that reason, because Scripture does say that you should not seek special revelation from the dead, that's very clear. But if we're to critique Harry Potter, then we also need to critique A Christmas Carol, which is, of course, right there in the title is Christmas. It's a celebration of Christ's Mass, Christ's arrival, of the Nativity originally. But the story itself is far more about the life of Ebenezer Scrooge. And these spirits of past, present, and future Christmas come to him, and they give him special revelation, as if saints or some kind of angelic visitation. Dickens is playing there with the English ghost story tradition and just mixing and matching it with the Judeo-Christian elements of the story. So, if nothing else, maybe we ought to be consistent. If Harry Potter has got to go because there are ghosts in it, and special revelation from non-divine sources, then A Christmas Carol would also need to go. Maybe there's a way to Christianize A Christmas Carol. Maybe some authors have done that. I think it's already pretty Christian as it is, and yet there's also some moralism in there, but there's also grace and mercy.
Sure.
So Christians have to read that story, and we're the ones who bring the gospel into a story like that, and we're the ones who bring the gospel into a story like Harry Potter. We're not getting the gospel out of it necessarily. We are seeing that this is a story that is made in God's universe using God's parts found scattered about the house. We're the ones who know how to assemble them and say, well, this is what it actually means in God's greater, true meta story. If we can't do that, if we find ourselves tempted to sin and unable to bring the gospel into it, then yes, we need to put the story away, even if it's a classic like A Christmas Carol or a newer fairy story like a Harry Potter series.
Yeah, the constant thought I've been having while watching A Christmas Carol this week as my kids perform in it is the parable that Jesus tells of the man that hoarded his wealth, and then all of a sudden he faced judgment.
Oh, yeah. Dickens' take on that, basically. Exactly.
Yeah. It's really just a retelling of that. And, the different ghosts of Christmas past and present and future, I mean, that is very much the Holy Spirit at work in Scrooge's heart. And yes, it is sort of a moralistic tale, but so much of what he's convicted about is what the Holy Spirit does convict us about, just the greed and the coldness of heart, and really just kind of hatred towards people, and just a disdain for the poor. Like, God cares about the poor, and he cares about generosity, and he cares about family, and he cares about rest. Scrooge is a workaholic. So there are so many things that he's convicted of that are correct, that he's correctly convicted of. Now, yes, Jesus doesn't appear on the scene and save his soul. There's really no preaching of the gospel, but I think it's a really short jump to go from that story into the gospel. And I'm seeing this now, but with you and Shane talking about Harry Potter, it's not that far of a jump to go from there to a more gospel-centered meaning that we can find. And so it's definitely opened me up to Harry Potter, because again, I've never really been that interested in it. I've wanted to read it out of curiosity, but it's just it's not my cup of tea, necessarily for fantasy. But you guys are warming me up to it.
Well, of course, avoid it if it gives you the heebie-jeebies or flashbacks to an occultic past. I mean, that we laugh about that, but it is very serious. Some Christians do struggle with those associations, and I would never want to dismiss those or slander them as a legalist or something like that. If you've got a genuine conscience issue with that, what the old translation would have called scruples, then definitely avoid. But if you don't, then it may be something you enjoy, especially if someone you love is already into it and you would like to join them for excursions in that world. Speaking of which, next on Fantastical Truth, our final episode of this year. Christmas time is here, and we're going to kind of take a break with our next episode just by echoing a live stream replay from earlier this month. Once again, this one is called Behold the Fantastic Glories Redeeming YA Fantasy. Marion Jacobs and James R. Hannibal joined me for this Realmmakers live stream, not just to discern the nonsense and nastiness in our favorite stories, or stories that we don't like so much like we did before, but we're going to mostly thank God for the chance to find great stories and receive them with thanksgiving and holiness. That is our mission at Lorehaven, and it will especially be our mission with the Lorehaven Guild, opening for monthly book quests and community starting next month. We hope you will join us, not only for the podcast continuing and for the Lorehaven Guild, but for Christ's glory, as we continue to seek and find his fantastical truth.